things I've been thinking yesterday, maybe some of you might share this reflection with me, is that much too often we resume it to a continent, Africa. It's so many different realities, and I feel humbled every time I've got the privilege to be on the continent, and every time I've got the privilege to understanding a little bit more of what is going on. So please, if I'm now going to speak to you about the endeavor of the Robert Bosch Foundation I've got the privilege to represent today, please keep in mind that we consider ourselves as learners on the ground, learners of a complex reality, which is education in Africa and higher education as well. So again, habari za asubuhi, and thank you for having me here, Kofi. It's a privilege. So what I want to do this morning, I want to, as the program lines it out, I want to show you a little bit what one of the major European and German foundations, the Robert Bosch Foundation, is doing. A little bit, don't be afraid, because it's a complex slide. Germans tend to be complex, so don't worry about this. And the second thing is I would like to show you a little bit the endeavor we've been starting to bring up about a year ago, which hopefully can bring something to the debate, but what I'm really keen on, bring something to action, because this is another reflection I would like to share initially. I didn't do that when being asked before. My impression is that we've been ready to action for a long time, and I've been having the privilege to attending several meetings with some people I've met there who are here today. I tend to meet the same people, great people, and my impression is that the community talking about education in Africa internationally is rather limited in size. And I heard a gentleman telling me that the number of people determining the international discussion on global education might be about 200 worldwide. So it's very interesting to talk about these. And I would very much encourage us this morning also to think about systematically of the different actors that are engaged on the continent and beyond to really catch those opportunities for transforming higher education. So let me first of all talk you a little bit into the Bosch Foundation. Topics the Bosch Foundation has been working on for 50 years are healthcare, science, society, which is mainly social inclusion, education, and international relations, which is a huge amount of bi- and multilateral context we're working in. And the key thing we believe in, which is on the core mission, is we believe in the individual and the power of people to change. It's a little pathetic, but we really believe that people together can change something, as well as people might be able to change and transform higher education here on the continent. So we've been investing a lot, a little bit as the MasterCard Foundation, but not in that extent, in stipend programs. We foster exchange between different countries, Germany and others around the world. And there is a couple of institutions we run. So our privilege is to also have a school, which is the United World College Germany. Some of you might know the one in Swaziland that has been brought up a couple of years ago, which is a fantastic institution. So there is some expertise in the context of education. We share other expertise. We've got a normal construction. We're based in Stuttgart, which is in the southwest of Germany. We've got an office in Berlin. We don't have any offices abroad. We don't have any office in Africa. So this is just a little bit the way the Bosch Foundation is constructed. And our board, a couple of years ago, observing and trying to learn what was going on in the world, and given our international engagement and also the engagement of our business, was wondering if, and if yes, how our foundation might be active and become active here on the continent. So you see me here standing at the end, so to say, of a long line of reflection, because the topics are numerous you might get engaged in. Of course, we have got substantial funding available, but given the amount of things we do, you really have to be careful in how you invest things. So what we thought could be interesting, and this was a suggestion to our board, was to take our core activities and to think how we might bring that expertise to the continent. So we've been starting to work in science. Our first big investment, there was a privilege again to share this with the MasterCard Foundation and the Carnegie Corporation and other funders, was to support the African Institute of Mathematics and Sciences, to help bringing up the first Next Einstein Forum you might have heard of, which took place a year ago in Dakar, the next one in Kigali next year. So given our expertise in science, which is one of the topics, we thought it to be interesting to bring that to the continent as well. So that was the start. We're doing some other things, mainly here in East Africa, around civil society, and then there is education. And I'll walk back now to talk you into this. Thanks. So as you can clearly see, I'm not born on the continent. I'm new to the continent. I've been learning a lot. So what do you do at the beginning of such an endeavor? Well, I took my time to speak, to travel, to read, and to really understand some of the issues around. And, if you're new, and this is going to be one of my narrative, you just don't know where to go. It's a very impressive, I don't know about the other foundation representatives here, or other funders. I know some of the major funders in Germany are on the continent on different topics. You just stand there and say, how is this all organized? Who is doing what? What are the best examples? If you want to go for example, for stipends and bursaries, whom are you going to? Which country are you starting in? Est-ce que je le fais en français? Or am I going to do it in English? So huge amounts. So the impression I had in the beginning and shared was, and sorry for taking a negative term, was an unjoined up space with lots of funders, but I couldn't even find lists of the experts I should go to. I found something in Germany, and then I started to meet great colleagues like Coffee and other people who were starting to talk me in. And I met then, and so the choice we had was to either go in one country, dig deep. TVET was an option. We're going to talk about this today, because given the background of the Bosch Foundation, Germany, all the vocational training thing, but then you discover in that space, there is plethora of different actors already. Germany, I will come back to that later, holds 40 different partnerships with countries worldwide to try to expand, to export, if you wish, which is difficult, coming to back there later, some elements of the dual German system. So in doing all this, I came across an inspirational idea, which I will, next slide, please. See, this is German high technology. Thank you. I came across a highly interesting idea, which is now becoming a reality, which is called ESSA, Education Sub-Saharan Africa, very simply, which I will try and talk you through, because this is the main engagement of the Robert Bosch Foundation currently in the space. So I met a British social entrepreneur, a very impressive guy who'd been doing a lot of work on the continent in schools, bringing up several charities, helping a lot of children, mainly working in the teaching of math and English. And I really liked the thinking behind this. So we jumped on board and we took the idea. I will explain it to you. It's a little bit taking up the discussion to the climate. So I will reveal what's it all about in a little moment. And the fit seemed perfect, because what we wanted to do was not going into one jurisdiction and be narrow, but try to be strategic, because 50 years of experience encouraged us to try and be ambitious in what we want to do. So the other thing that really is interesting, and one of the panels yesterday talked about it, is the way you do philanthropic work. 50 years we've been around. You tend to be, I had a great conversation yesterday with somebody here around institutions that become a little stiff, having been around a long time. So I don't want to be unloyal. I really like the place I work at. But, so I really like the spirit of venture philanthropy. Take risks, get out there, be ambitious, and do more than just give cash. So this is what we did. We took the idea on board. My boss, our CEO, so I'm second level in the foundation. My boss went on the board of a startup. You see the risk. A startup in the UK. And I, believe it or not, I couldn't believe my eyes. My shoulders are getting a little heavy, because they put another job on my shoulders, which was not just doing the work I do with the Bosch Foundation, but they asked me to be the founding director of a new institution, which is Education Sub-Saharan Africa. So trying to cope. But this is a really impressive way to do philanthropic work, we hope. And it's taking risks, because the thing I'm going to present to you now could very easily fail. So what is ESSA all about? Again, let me introduce this by quoting a couple of things Kofi have been talking about yesterday. So what I also got from the conversation, is that who does really what? I met many of your people here, but I just could find out what people were doing when talking to them. Of course, there are tons of websites, But again, it's this unjoined upness, and you need conferences and gatherings like this one to really get an understanding. So you'll see it's going to be around the joining up of people, what ESSA is all about. And the other thing is how to understand the space. Where can I read substantially and have quality conversations to understand how higher education is organized in Burkina Faso, or in South Africa, or somewhere else? So this is a really interesting thing. So I've kept meeting people at hotels, conferences, who added bits and pieces, but there was no one-stop shop to get all this information substantially on board. So if you see at the heart of this circle, which I draw here, you see the purpose of Education Sub-Saharan Africa. It's not to reinvent the wheel, but to join up as a broker, if you dare say so, in partnership, and I'll come back to this later, to inspire, to inform, or I put it another way, in another way, to collate, to create, and to communicate relevant information and connection on education in Sub-Saharan Africa. That's the core purpose. So there is nobody now, in my understanding, who does this job. Of course, everybody goes to the UNESCO data bank, of course, and this is relevant, and we don't want to put ourselves in the place. That would be a hybris and not any use, but we can try and join up people around and institutions around different topics, and I'm going to give you a couple of examples to this. So the vision behind all this is not just gathering data and joining up people, but the vision is really to try and support people to move to action. But really an important point to me is this is not about the Bosch Foundation. This is not about ESSA, which is a sort of distributed center. So I'm just starting to staff to bring people in. So it's not a UK institution, it's just registered in the UK. So hopefully even after Brexit that will make sense because of the addressability of a UK-based institution in terms of funding and so forth. So the vision then is really to contribute by joining up, by being a neutral broker to hope to make education, very simply, better, and better as a result of more and more concrete cooperation on the basis of trustful data and information, which is accessible, this is a very important point, and usable, and which is updated. So a broker. So what does this mean in practice? And if you have a look at my circle, hopefully you can read it, you find 4 dimensions on this. So there's one dimension in blue, which is being a proactive connector. Let me give you an example of how this works. So keep in mind, we're a toddler, not even a year around, and I've been spending my time in positioning us a little bit. I can't quote it because precisely because we're still in the making of a partnership, but so higher education is the early emphasis, right? What could you identify as the key issues in higher education, not only in Africa, by the way, but also in Africa? Governance, strategy, resources. And you could subsume a lot of things under strategy, and we've been talking about this yesterday, for example. So one key thing, for me, cross-cutting the 3 things, given the future, which everybody quotes when it comes to the youth bulge, is, of course, we need new universities. We need to expand the capacity of universities. We might need other conversations we're going to have later, institutions more tackling the needs of the future workforce. Hillary, you're going to talk about this later. But who's wondering about where the faculty is coming from? We all know the situations around PhDs on the continent. Who's going to be a professor in whatever institution in 15 years? So I think there's a big thing around faculty and faculty development. So we've decided to put a first emphasis on this. The first thing we will do is to try and create more attention for this. So we've been partnering. We've just signed a partnership agreement with the African Association of Universities here on the continent. I happen to know Etienne, the General Secretary, quite well. A research center in the US, which is one of the top, it's a spill-off out of Princeton. So you see, we look for top institutions to partner together around what we call the demographics of faculty, to really module a series of scenarios how this situation might evolve in the upcoming years. And this is not just a study, but it's relevant data and it's relevant action plans. So how could you do this? What needs to be done now by whom in a cooperative manner to bring that key topic in my mind, but let's discuss it later, around faculty really moving. So that's one thing. So you see, we try to join, identify interesting actors. They'd never cooperated before. And so we try to bring them together and to co-develop then the different ideas. Another example is in the space of higher education, if you look at research. So we've been one of our big partners is Cambridge University. In Cambridge, in England, you've got one of the departments who is doing in the West some of the most substantial research on it. So then we've been looking at what they've been doing, and the Francophone things are not in there. It's a language thing, as usually. So we're partnering currently with the French Development Agency, a French university and a network which is called NORAG, which is based in Geneva, which is doing quite impressive work in joining up things together. So what we want to focus on together in 2 jurisdictions, the one will be West Africa, is to try to identify what is done in terms of research on education on the continent by African researchers who are not sufficiently taken into account to inform their governments on policy making, to try and join them up and try to drive in more funding into this. By the way, this whole thing is also, about identifying further funding and try to channel it into areas that might really, really be useful. So that's another example of us trying to join up. And again, it's a very early stage. Many of you might imagine many other places where one might join up substantially, not only in higher education, but also in other contexts. So this is, could you go back, please? I need the circle now. Thank you. So the other thing is what we want to try to do, and which is, I think, a real need, is to contribute to strengthen capacity building. So if you take the topic I was just talking about, faculty, we've been trying to join up other institutions. There's a name that has been quoted all the time yesterday, which is Fred Swaneker. So we're proud to be one of his partners with the African Leadership University, Mauritius, and now in Kigali, Rwanda. And so we're in the very early stages of making this up, and we're partnering with one of the major business schools in the world and with Fred. And the idea is to, take out lots of the management stuff in the cupboards of that business school and bring it toward educational leaders. If you think, I see 4 categories to doing this. You could go into leadership development in NGOs working on education. Fred is an outstanding example. Patrick Avua has been quoted yesterday, a great Ghanaian guy who's doing something like the Princeton of Africa. So where do these guys come from? There are others around, but I think they often would need more management skills to do their job differently. So that's one group. The other group I'm very keen on is, if you look at universities, because this is higher education, look at the development people, the people who develop universities, the HR department. So I think there's a great need for strengthening the capacity, and we are thinking about a way to scale this thing, these different formats we're going to develop with the 2 partners, and to sort of bring them on the continent through different channels and different languages. And you could tackle a lot of people and try to, help them a lot in developing. Another group you might think of is head teachers. And the last, and I think the most difficult group, is people in government. But there can be an opening, and by the way, this whole thing when developing, will be designed in co-creation, of course, with African countries, because we are keen on following the priorities which are taken by those whose mandate it is to develop education. So, second thing. The third thing, and this is the most substantial one, and the most difficult, is to create that knowledge hub I've been talking about before. So that place where things might be found and might be brought together. So the idea really, and this is absolutely ambitious, and I know if you're going to get there, is the creation what we've called an African high-quality, globally authoritative, edited open source platform in order to collate, order, analyze, and communicate relevant data about education in sub-Saharan Africa. You haven't found a website yet if you looked it up, and this is on purpose. It's not the cash. We don't have to do this, because I think there's no use of having a website just to have a website. The things I'm talking about need to be proved in concept to be put on a website. So we prefer being active on social media, bringing us up there, creating awareness. And it's a great space to be working in, you know, one might own in a certain way. So this is the thing we're doing. I could talk now a long time about data. I will not do it substantially for the sake of time. Maybe that's a topic to discuss about later, but let me just share with you this observation. Wherever I've been to on the continent, outside the continent, at gatherings around education, the data thing has been very much at the front line of the discussions, because we all know that everybody who wants to do serious work in education, wherever, needs trustful data. And just to give you a flair of what I'm talking about, so it's not, of course, gathering data on the ground. This is, I can't do this. I don't have either the competence nor the resources doing this, but there's others doing it. But there would be a way of bringing a conversation up between different providers, so to say. You've seen here, if you could put on the next slide, please. Just very briefly, we're partnering down on the right side with Analyse Africa, which is a business which has been brought up by the Financial Times. It's based in London and Northern Ireland, and what they do, and it's a Nikkei index as well who's working on this, so we're very proud of partnering with them as their education partner. So what they do is they aggregate data. For example, if you were interested in if you had a business and you were interested in having a country report on Nigeria, let's say, to implement your own business structures, they could be a partner for you in bringing up the essential information. And we've managed to be their partner in terms of education. So because education is a key thing for investors to get into a place, for example. So they got a wonderful and extremely well-received social media network, of course. So this is one thing. So again, back to the data. So if you look at the data situation right now, I would like to get on the fellowship thing, if I look at you. I've been very impressed by the work you do, the Bosch Foundation does, and others, and I've been thinking, and this is one type of data we would like to collect and to communicate in the hub, is who knows how talent is identified? What schools are doing well in identifying talents? How do they do this? How do they encourage young people to choose a good pathway for their education? How do maybe regional instances in the education space help in order to do this? For example, if you look at all the fellowships around, I don't know if anybody here in the room has, if yes, please, would love to talk to you, a list of all the fellowships around for Africans on the continent or abroad. What are they doing? What are the experiences? What could be done better, you know? What shouldn't be done? And there's a big thing we would love to get into, which is a terrible thing, which is fraud. As a business person, I would always say, when you look at resources, which is one of the big things, let's first try to let less money go out before we try to get more money in, you know? So nobody has talked yet about ghost fellowship programs. That exists, unfortunately, as there is tons of ghost teachers, as you all know. There's no concrete estimation about the money that could be saved, but the number we've calculated, roughly, you know, don't quote me on this, would be $20 billion a year that could be saved to African, you know, pockets, African countries' pockets, if you could, you know, drive out that phenomena of corruption when it comes to, you know, teachers who are just existing as a name on a payroll. So this is something that will be then in this data hub. So happy to talk to you about this a little later. So the circle will be tried to be activated through these different dimensions, and you've seen some of the principles that are going to guideline our work. There's a lot of mappings we currently try to do in finding out the state of education in higher education, and very happy to talk to you in this later. So this is what we do. And what we try to do, and a very important thing on this slide is what's next? So again, it's a couple of months up, so what we really want to do is to drive this to first deliveries, because we have to do a sort of proof of concept that we are able, with partners, to do this. A second thing is then to raise additional funding, core and project, because the Bosch Foundation is well investing, as you can imagine, but this mustn't be a Bosch Foundation endeavor only. And we are talking to philanthropists and other people on the continent and around to get more money in and to do some of the things we could only do with partners and more resources around this. The second thing is to continue to increase and develop our partnerships. So one of the reasons I'm here, because I think there can be people here in this room who might be interested in looking at this together, this whole endeavor. It's also to continue to build our board, which has started to be African, you know, and the team I will recruit will be African. I will step down to give the place to an African colleague, because this must be driven by an African. And finally, we have to invest in building our digital capacities. Just allow me just one, I know it's short in time, but one thought I really want to share with you is, which hasn't appeared yesterday, I think to really change the situation, if we found somebody who was willing to invest in big data people, in statisticians in Africa, with a sort of longer collective memory in the different departments, that would be a great thing to be added on here in Africa in the different departments. We had the opportunity to attend the first UN data forum, which was taking place in January in Cape Town in South Africa. So you had a whole bunch of very interesting people from all over the place, not just Africa, talking about statistics and the options big data give today to increase. I mean, health has been a very good example for this. The Gates Foundation's investment, for example, in this space are tremendous. And healthcare and the way they treat data could be a very interesting example for education as well. I just wanted to share this reflection with you. And so when we're talking to a couple of, you know, tech companies in order to get them interested in what we do. So this is my last slide. It's been very important whilst doing this to us, not to do it in a, you know, room somewhere in Stuttgart, or not even in Nairobi, but we've been a lot around with young Africans. People, you know, from the secondary school level students, and many of the ideas I've been presenting to you have been, you know, brought up by young Africans. And I deeply believe, and I'm so thankful, Kofi, that you and your team brought young African students here on the panels, because what it's all about in our mind is, sorry, it sounds a little pathetic, but I really do believe it, it's about the young people. I know I've been spending a little time in the US when I was a boy. I'm still so impressed by the service notion the Americans have around universities. The university is there to service the students. And I think that spirit is important, it's our spirit. And let me just, so the point are these young people. So these I've taken. So the young lady you see here, that's in northern Limpopo, South Africa. And I just love this photo because it shows her great keenness to learn, in my interpretation. And I was just wondering what her professional, you know, pathway and study options will be. This is my motivation to do all this work. The one on the bottom are 3 kids. I've taken that last week in Kibera, because I was last week here as well. So one of the big slums here, and this is not to blame anybody, but to show the reality some people live in. And I think we have to orient our conversation around opportunities for transforming higher education with regards to these kids here. And the one I like the most is on the right-hand side. So as many of you will have seen immediately, this is not a rich environment. They don't have any school uniforms. They shouldn't be in the same class because they're different age groups. But what those 2 fellows do, they teach maths. They teach math to fellow pupils. This is in South Africa as well, in a big urban slum area. And they've been benefiting of the intervention of a charity which is trying to change the way teaching is done in school. And I learned a lot from these 2 guys about my old mathematic knowledge, which was far back. And I just wanted to share these couple of images, not to be pathetic, but to remind us that all we do here is not for ourselves. Thank you.